Yo, what's good everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy channel, and in this video, I'm going to go over my top starts of the week for week 10 of the 2023 fantasy football season. Please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's get right into it. We're going to start at the quarterback position, where I am going to talk about Jared Goff, quarterback of the Detroit Lions. It hasn't been great the last couple of weeks, and Jared Goff is normally someone that you start at home versus on the road, but coming off of their bye week, they get a good matchup, a great matchup against the LA Chargers. They are on the road, but this is a matchup that I think Jared Goff should be able to exploit. He has the weapons, and I think he is a nice mid-quarterback one play for Week 10 against the LA Chargers on the road. And then next up, Kyler Murray, quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals. He's coming off of that ACL injury, but Week 1, his first game back, I am throwing him in the lineup unless you have a locked and loaded top-end starter. I like him as a quarterback one play in his first game back from injury against the Atlanta Falcons. They have taken their time with this injury. He should be healthy and good to go. And Kyler Murray, when he's on the field, he's a great player for fantasy. He offers a little bit on the ground as well, obviously. We'll see how much he runs coming off that knee injury. But it's a great matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. And I like him as a quarterback one start in Week 10 in his first game back. And things should only improve from there. We're going to move on to the running back position, where my first start of the week is Tony Pollard, running back of the Dallas Cowboys. And this is someone who was drafted very early in drafts, and he had a great Week 1 against the New York Giants. Since then, it's been pretty mediocre to disappointing, not quite living up to that draft capital. We were hoping that this was a player who would be such an obvious of a start each and every week that you couldn't really make him a start of the week, type of player like a Christian McCaffrey. I'm not going to sit here and make Christian McCaffrey a start of the week because you're playing him each and every week no matter what, right? But Tony Pollard, I just wanted to talk about him because he is playing that same New York Giants defense that he finished with 21.2 points against in Week 1, and half PPR was the running back 5 on the week. And in Week 10, he's taking on the same team. This time they're at home. They are heavy favorites. The Giants are down to DeVito, their third string quarterback. And I was maybe going to make Dak Prescott a quarterback start of the week, but I really just wanted to focus on Tony Pollard because I think the Cowboys will be in control of this game. The defense is going to dominate, and I think they're going to have plenty of opportunities to run the ball down their throats late in this game. And I do think he still will be used in the passing game a little bit as well. So he is a locked-in running back one play for Week 10 against the New York Giants as heavy favorites. My next running back start of the week is Joe Mixon, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals. They're taking on the Houston Texans. So I see this matchup going one of two ways. It's either a competitive, high-scoring, back-and-forth game between two offenses that can put up a lot of points. The Cincinnati Bengals are back, though, and it would not shock me if they get a lead at home against the Houston Texans. So if it is not a back-and-forth, competitive, high-scoring game, I think it'll be a game where the Cincinnati Bengals kind of just take control and can run out the clock a little bit in the second half. And that is a great game script for Joe Mixon. Their offense has been rolling lately, and this is a great opportunity for Joe Mixon to get a nice, healthy workload on the ground, hopefully see a handful of targets. And the Houston Texans matchup, it's not as juicy of a running matchup as it was in years past, but they can still be exploited on the ground, so the matchup doesn't worry me at all. Joe Mixon, he's had his ups and downs this year, but he's coming off of a running back 7 and 11 finish in half PPR. So you got to put him in your lineup as a running back 1 in Week 10 at home against the Houston Texans. My next running back start of the week is Javonte Williams, running back of the Denver Broncos. Listen, he was coming off that devastating knee injury. It wasn't looking good to start the year, but the last handful of weeks, it's been getting better, and the Broncos as a whole have definitely improved as well. Which has kind of allowed him to get, healthy volume on the ground. He's coming off of a game. They're coming off their bye week, but the week before that, he had 27 carries on the ground. Not very efficient, but that just shows that this is his backfield. He also saw 3 targets the week before. He had 15 carries, a little more efficient with 82 yards on the ground. Had 4 targets in that game, so you love to see that. He is not like a top-end running back 1 at this stage, but he is kind of coming back from that injury. He's looked better. He's getting the opportunity. He's taking over the backfield, and I like him as a nice running back 2 play in Week 10 against the Buffalo Bills, who they have given up points to running backs at times, so it's not, it's not like this dream matchup like when D'Onta Foreman was named the starter against the Panthers. I just forced him into my lineup on Thursday night. But The Buffalo Bills, they can give it up on the ground a little bit. My biggest worry is that the game might not be competitive if the Bills kind of take control and dominate, and the Broncos aren't able to run the ball as much. But even if that happens, he should be used a little bit in the passing game, should still be their lead back on the ground. And the Broncos have been playing a lot better than they were to start the year. They're coming off of a win, a dominant win against the Kansas City Chiefs. So I'm not saying that that trend is going to continue and they're going to knock off the Bills on the road, but the point being is that it might be more competitive than we think. So I like Javonte Williams as a running back to play in Week 10 against the Bills. Next up, we got Rhamondre Stevenson, running back of the New England Patriots. I like him a lot this week. He's been a little disappointing in terms of his draft capital and how he's been performing, but it's been a little bit better the last few weeks. He's coming off of a running back 3 overall finish with 20.9 points in half PPR. Only 9 carries, but he ripped off a big 64-yard touchdown. And we love to see those 6 targets through the air turn into 4 for 42. Now he's taking on the Colts. It's a pretty good matchup, not one that scares me. And the Colts have had some higher scoring games this year, so ideally we'd like to see a game that there's a lot of points being scored. I kind of like Javonte Williams, not someone that I'm forcing into my lineup no matter what. But he is somebody that you are probably starting, especially because he's getting hot. The matchup is pretty good. I did just actually trade Rhamondre Stevenson in one league. I gave up him and Jahan Dotson, and I actually got back Jamar Chase, which was a great trade for me, I think. And I also got Tajay Spears in the deal as well. But I still do like Rhamondre Stevenson to improve on top of kind of what we saw the first half of the year. And I think in Week 10, hopefully we see a little more carries, only 8, 10, 9, 10, and 9 carries on the ground the last few weeks because, Zeke is involved. But I think this is a matchup that he can exploit in, unless you have a really locked-in running back option, kind of like what I'm dealing with, where I had, Deontay Foreman, so I kind of have to make a decision where do I got Rhamondre Stevenson, I got Kenneth Walker, Tyler Lockett, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen. It's like who is the odd man out here? So, but unless you're dealing with a situation like that, Rhamondre Stevenson is pretty much a lineup lock in Week 10. And then for my last running back start of the week, I'm going to go with a duo, actually, and that is Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, the running back duo for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Najee Harris has actually been pretty good for fantasy since their bye week the last few weeks, 14.3, 8, and 14.6 points in half PPR. Those two 14-plus point performances were good enough for running back 12 finishes on the week. And then Jaylen Warren has also been usable, all season long. He's good for around 10 points most weeks, involved in the passing game. But Najee Harris has been playing better, and now they're taking on the Green Bay Packers, which is a good matchup for running backs. So if you're looking for a running back 2 or a flex option, you could put Najee Harris in there. Not a must start, but someone who I think, is a nice safe play, should be a good bet for double digits. Hopefully he gets in the end zone. And then Jaylen Warren is a nice, running back 2, running back 3 type of option, someone you can put in your flex. He's coming off of a running back 14 overall finish last week with 12.8 points against the Tennessee Titans. So he's not like a huge upside play, but just a couple of safe plays where maybe you wrote off Najee Harris as someone that you couldn't play, or maybe you look at Jaylen Warren and think, oh, he's the backup, I don't want to play him. But both of these guys do have value that can be extracted in this matchup in Week 10 against the Green Bay Packers. We're going to move on to the wide receiver position. I'm going to start with Mike Evans, wide receiver of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a player who he's on that team that I was talking about where I forced Deontay Foreman into the lineup. I have to decide who to sit. Mike Evans is on that team, and he's someone where it's like I just feel like I have to put him in the lineup. He's been so good all year. I know in Week 8 against the Buffalo Bills, he had that fluky touchdown that had him, made him have a good fantasy day. But all year long, he's been pretty consistently in double digits. He has big game upside, as we saw in Week 2 with 26.1 points in half PPR, the wide receiver 2 overall in the week. And in Week 10, he gets a dream matchup against the Tennessee Titans. They kind of shut down the run, and teams are able to pass on them. So it's one of those situations where I think the Buccaneers are going to have success through the air, and they probably won't be able to run the ball super well. And he's just a nice, consistent player who has big upside because he can get in the end zone. So he is a wide receiver 1 play in Week 10 against the Tennessee Titans. And I know the San Francisco 49ers offense has been struggling, but Debo is back, and I think that means good things for the offense as a whole. So I'm going to make Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers, a start of the week. Debo Samuel is also someone that I have on that team that I mentioned. So I have some tough start-sit calls here, but I digress. I want to talk about Brandon Aiyuk. In Week 10, he's taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. These are two of the better teams in the league. I know the 49ers have been struggling lately, but like I said, Deebo Samuel is back from injury, and that should help the offense as a whole. And in this matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, they give up good production to outside wide receivers. So I think Brandon Aiyuk should be able to kind of bounce back a little bit. He's, his last time we saw him, 13.4 points. He'll take that. He had 109 yards, so obviously coming off a good game. But in Week 10, I think he's someone that you got to put in your lineup as a low wide receiver 1 play in Week 10 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Next up, we have DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver of the Tennessee Titans. This is all about the player, first and foremost, but also the matchup. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers just gave up a huge game to the Houston Texans through the air. C.J. Stroud threw like 400-plus passing yards, 5 passing touchdowns. And they just give up a lot of points to wide receivers in general in Tampa Bay. And DeAndre Hopkins, a couple weeks ago, I had him on my bench against Atlanta when he had that 3-touchdown game with Will Levis taking over. I wasn't sure what the offense would look like, and clearly that was a mistake to have him on the bench. I put him in my lineup the next week against Pittsburgh, another good matchup for wide receivers. He saw 11 targets, but it only turned into 4 for 60, 8.5 points in half PPR. So he's been a frustrating player to roster for me, and probably you guys if you guys had him on the bench and then put him back out there. But in Week 10, I'm rolling with him as a wide receiver 1 in a great matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that can be exploited, and as we saw a couple weeks ago, he still has the ability to put up week-winning performances. So you got to put him in your lineup as a wide receiver 1 in Week 10 against the Tampa Bay Bucs. My final wide receiver start of the week is going to be Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. He's had an up-and-down season. He's coming off of 2 really tough matchups against the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens. And even in Week 8 against that tough Cleveland defense, he put up 18.1 points. But last week, he only had 4.7 points. So long story short, I just want to bring him up in this video because he's someone that you should be trying to put in your lineup as a wide receiver 2 with upside. Each and every week, Tyler Lockett is just one of those players where he can win you a week. That's just kind of the player he's been throughout his career. So he's always someone that you really want to be hesitant to bench, at least in my opinion. I would rather start him over someone who's, like a Michael Thomas, more of a sure bet for like 8 points because, if Lockett gets 5 points versus 8 points, okay, whatever. But if I start someone who gets 8 points and Lockett goes off for 25 on my bench, I'm going to be pretty sad. So in Week 10, he's taking on the Washington Commanders. That is a great matchup for wide receivers. There should be plenty of production to be had, and I think the Seattle Seahawks as a whole bounce back in this one. So Tyler Lockett is a wide receiver 2 with upside in Week 10 at home against the Washington Commanders. And then finally, we're going to move on to the tight end position, and I feel like I've been talking about this guy a lot, but I have to bring him up again. It's Taysom Hill, tight end of the New Orleans Saints. The last few weeks, he's been the tight end 9, 5, 1, and 4 in half PPR. You just have to keep rolling with him in this matchup. I had Cole Kmet and Taysom Hill on one of my teams, and even with how good Cole Kmet has been playing lately, I know now the Thursday night game against the Panthers has happened, and we know he didn't really do that well for fantasy. But even, with how well Kmet has been playing, I had him on the bench, and I had Taysom Hill in my lineup because Taysom Hill has something that most tight ends don't have, and that is weak winning upside. We saw him score 22 points a couple weeks ago. He's being used on the ground. He's being used in the receiving game. He can throw the ball. They use him so much, and he goes through these phases where sometimes they use him, sometimes he's kind of an afterthought, and he's being relied on right now in this offense. So in Week 10, on the road against my Minnesota Vikings, Skull Baby, it's a great. It's just one of those situations where you have to keep him in your lineup unless you have like a Kelsey or a Mark Andrews, maybe like a Sam Laporta type of guy. But obviously they're gonna have to keep up with Josh Dobbs. They're gonna have to put up points. So start Taysom Hill with confidence in Week 10 against the Minnesota Vikings. We're gonna go with Dalton Kincaid as my next tight end start of the week for the Buffalo Bills. Since Dawson Knox has been missing games with injury, Dalton Kincaid has taken over, shown why he was drafted so high. It seems like he's taken over as the number 2 in this offense behind Diggs and ahead of Gabe Davis. His last 3 weeks, he scored 11.5, 15, and 11.1 points at half PPR. The tight end 7, 7, and 11 on the week, each of those weeks. And this is no fluke. It's not one of those things where he just happened to, catch a couple 1-yard touchdowns here and there. He's seen 8, 7, and 11 targets the last few weeks, 75, 65, and 81 yards. So you love to see that. That's very rare to get that type of usage out of a tight end. And when you have it, you got to put it in your lineup. So they're taking on the Denver Broncos. They give up points to the tight end position. So unless you have, one of those locked-in guys like a Kelsey or an Andrews, Dalton Kincaid is a must-start tight end in Week 10 against the Broncos. And then finally, it is my pleasure to introduce Dalton Schultz, tight end of the Houston Texans. I've had a weird relationship with Dalton Schultz. I was his biggest proponent when he was on the Cowboys. In my leagues with my friends, I overdrafted him a little bit. I picked him up off the waiver wire in our Dynasty League, and I did eventually trade him away in a deal. I believe it was to get Jaylen Waddle, so I kind of had to do it, but he has been great for fantasy. Let me see, 1, 2, 3. So in 4 of his last 5 games, he's been the tight end 6 or better. 11.7, 16, 14.1, bye week, 1.5, and then he's coming off of a 22-point game where he was a tight end 1 on the week in half PPR, saw 11 targets, turned into 10 for 130 and a touchdown. It is going to be very hard to turn away from Dalton Schultz, especially in a matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, who do give up production to the tight end position. I do think we could see Stroud and the offense as a whole. You know, they're coming off of that high victory where they put up 39 points. Stroud threw 5 touchdowns and like almost 500 yards. Obviously, he's not going to put up that type of production. But even with that being said, I do think we could kind of see them fall on their face a little bit just because they're on the road against a Super Bowl contending Cincinnati team that is kind of finding themselves a little bit. But even if that does happen, I just think that means that Stroud is going to look for Dalton Schultz as sort of that security blanket. So I think Schultz is a very safe play. And as we've seen the last few weeks, 2 of his last 3 games, he's been a top 2 tight end on the week. So sort of like the other guys I mentioned, you know, I'm not going to tell you to start Travis Kelce because you auto start him every week. But unless you have a guy like that, Dalton Schultz is someone that should probably be in your lineup as a tight end 1 in Week 10 on the road against the Cincinnati Bengals. And that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more fantasy football content. Good luck in Week 10, and I'll see you guys later. Peace out.